but that figure is also growing. But on the bad side, the tribal system, which provided so much stability to the country, is badly fracturing. Senior sheikhs for quite some time now have become cityfied, and many of them corrupt, and have lost a great deal of authority over their tribesmen. Southern Yemenis, they feel occupied by the North, I believe, ever since '94. And expectations of government services in the country are far outstripping the government's ability to deal with them. So, forgive me if I try to give you a quick list of problems, which I would divide into the regional problems and the political, social, economic problems that the country faces. I'm not going to talk about Al-Qaeda. That's really a subject that my colleague is much better qualified to talk about. But the first regional problem, of course, I think you're familiar with, are the Zaydis in the north and the Houthi Rebellion. The Zaydis, in a way, have lost their reason for being in Yemen. I mean, they used to run the country. Their elite, the Qadis and the Sayyids, were the people who ran the place, both under the imamate and for some years after the revolution. But now they really have lost their influence. They feel neglected. And I think at least equally, they feel they are being squeezed out in the north by the growth of fundamentalism, of Salafism. This is really a problem, I think, which they find existential and is the reason, I think, for some of the violence. And violence, of course, begets violence, and the government's military campaigns have also, I think, caused more violence. Aden in the south, as many of you know, feel occupied and controlled. After '94, they particularly resented, I think, that security, police, intelligence colonels and others would come there, and others that would come and take advantage of the confused land ownership position, which came about because of the Marxist government down there. And they really feel, I think, many of them shut out. In a way, some ways, that's really not fair because the government has done a great deal to try to develop Aden, but nevertheless, they feel dispossessed. Abyan, the region in the south, of course, has a long history of insurrection against the British and against the southern Yemeni government. Hadramaut is similar. The Hadramis, however, always wanted to be autonomous, and they were. Even under the British, there was hardly any presence there. In fact, one of the remarkable things about the fact that the area was British so long is that I would say whether you pick the Yemeni Revolution in '62 or the withdrawal of the British in late '67, the South was outside of Aden was much less well developed than the North, even despite all the problems in the North. But the Hadramaut has a long history of ties, first of all, to Southeast Asia, where many of these families became prominent in Malaysia, Indonesia, in Singapore, and some, of course, went to Saudi Arabia, most famously the Bin Laden family. But they have also felt that they have been mistreated. The area east of Sana'a, Marib, the Jauf, has long been a problem for any government. There are some particularly, I think, unusually for Yemen, some long and fairly violent tribal disputes in the area. The area was royalist, of course, for a long time after the revolution. They also are people who feel that they haven't been receiving the goods that they expect in terms of roads and clinics and so forth, but most of this is really beyond the ability of the government to produce. Merchants in Hodeidah are upset by the corruption. Taiz feels neglected. So unfortunately for the government of Yemen, there are an awful lot of people, justified or otherwise, who really feel that the government isn't doing enough for them. Well, these problems probably could be dealt with, I think, with some difficulty, but it's the other kind of disputes, the other kind of problems, I should say, which really cause the greatest concern to me. The first of these is population. Population in Yemen is growing at almost 3.5% a year. According to the CIA fact book, it's the fourth fastest growing country. But two of those countries, Kuwait and the UAE, have small indigenous populations and are pro-populations. So they're right up there with Niger. And this means that a country of at least 24 million now, there are 700,000 new Yemenis every year. Where these people can go and where they find employment is really up to me. I said there were 4 million when I went there in 1966. Some quick statistics, median age less than 17, 46% under the age of 14, and a fertility rate of 6.3 children per woman of childbearing age. No wonder then that the second issue is the decline in the standard of living. Cities are growing even faster, 4.5% a year. And the government has made efforts, and I remember this in the late 90s, to get away from unsustainable subsidies, but they have not been able, for example, to eliminate the subsidy on diesel, which is costing them $2 billion a year. This is in a country with about $9 billion in exports, almost all of which is oil. Oil revenues, of course, are going down slowly. One good piece of news, the end of November, the Yemenis loaded their first liquefied natural gas tanker, but the LNG is only estimated bringing in $1 to $2 billion a year for about 20 years. That's about $40 to $80 per Yemeni. That will help, but it certainly won't solve the fundamental problem. Before 1990, before the Gulf War, and before oil really picked up, Yemen government was very poor, but the Yemen as a country enjoyed very substantial immigrant remittances, especially from Saudi Arabia. Those pretty much ended with the 1990 war, but then oil picked up, and the government became better financed, and that has helped. But now it's hard to see in the long term where Yemen is going to find the revenues that it needs. Third problem I mentioned, I think fundamentalism is a serious problem growing in Yemen. I think for some people see Salafism as more modern than their traditional forms of Islam. That may be some of the attraction. But it's also a fact, of course, that having Saudi Arabia as a neighbor, I think, is certainly a mixed blessing. And I saw this all the way back in the early 70s, these Hanbali religious people coming in, very narrow-minded, not fitting in at all in Yemeni society, but they've had an effect. And I think people know that Saudi, being a rich country and always being concerned about Yemen for good or ill, has regularly and still does give very substantial subsidies to sheikhs and others, and this, of course, encourages them to go along on the religious side as well. And, of course, this, as I say, is particularly resented by the Zaydis in the north, but was also resented by the Adenis in the south. The secession issue seems to be mixed up. It's an area of esoteric that people like to study. Is the president, when he finishes his term, will he be succeeded by his son, or will it be someone else? Families have a great deal to say about this. Everybody speculates about the person they think is the second most powerful military man in Yemen, Ali Mohsen al-Ahmar, whom I understand, if I'm correct, is not a blood relative of the president, but the president's mother had two husbands, and he's the